Hello, everybody. Soon you'll listen to my conversation with Azel Chua. I'm sorry I got sick. My voice has changed slightly. I did my best to answer Azel's questions and to ask him some smart and intelligent questions. But please excuse me if my mental energy wasn't perfect in this episode. And yet, this is a good one. Azel came very well prepared. He showed us so many positions to make his points concrete. We discussed calculation steps, thought processes, and what to look at while calculating and how to make it scalable. He's a very thoughtful person, an interesting coach, and I will now leave you with Azel Chua. I'm very excited to talk to Candidate Master Azel Chua. He's a Chessable author, a very successful one, a chess coach, and a very important person to talk about many important things today. Especially from my channel, I would love to discuss thought process issues, calculation processes, coaching philosophies, improvements. I think Azel is a great guy to discuss these issues. Many of you also mentioned to me his name. Then we are delivering today. Azel, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, John.
Yes, as I mentioned, Azel, it's a great honor for me to talk to you about these concepts because you have a very successful calculation course on Chessable. I think you just broke some records. I also published one last year. It also won the best tactics course of the year last year. So we have lots of common interests when it comes to content, at least. I want to specifically talk about calculation issues, processes, and ways to get better in this core skill of chess. Arguably the most important chess skill, calculation to me. And you're an expert on this. You wrote a very successful course on this. And let's maybe dive in directly to those questions, right? But briefly, maybe I can ask you what made this course so successful?
You know, John, within the first few minutes of the launch, I had quite a few sales already, and that isn't enough time to read the peek inside or the blurb.
Yeah.
So I have to say huge credit goes to the thumbnail makers of Chessable.
They're
There
great
wasn't
people.
enough time for the first few customers to read much about the course before they bought
No.
it. And also, that was my first ever Chessable course, so nobody really knew me.
Right.
So certainly the title, thumbnail, and of course, being one of the earliest Chessable courses about
Yeah.
calculation. Now, about what I've done with the course, perhaps on the surface, and why I think the course continued to sell, I suspect it's how freely I give away information on the peak insights. Because when I make a peak insight, I always make sure you will walk away with a working understanding of what I'm teaching. Because I think people just want to know what they are buying. I
Yeah.
doubt any potential customer has ever watched a peek insight and thought, wow, this author has already given away such brilliant secret sauce, and now I have the peek insight, so I'm not going to buy the course.
Right.
I think that's an extremely rare scenario.
Rare.
And even if there are, it's not like if I had concealed the information and pretended to be mysterious, they would have bought the course anyway. And of course, I have full faith in the technique. The technique works. So there's going to be a lot of discussion about my methods in the forums and elsewhere.
Yes, absolutely. So, and I think your history, your personal history, I think that I read it on Chessable info that you were struggling, you were solving so many tactical puzzles when you were like around 14, maybe, yeah, 13. Then that just didn't work basically. So you then evaluate your methods, you thought through about calculation issues and thought processes, and then you found something, I believe, that later led to you becoming a candidate master. So is that also how you structure the course? Those kind of insights on calculation?
Yes, and on calculation, I'm actually very critical of calculation techniques compared to any other piece of advice in chess. And because when it comes to calculation, when it comes to tactics, people don't always know when there's a tactic looming.
Yeah,
So whatever technique you use, it should be easy to use throughout the game, almost effortless. The training can be effortful, but the execution when you're in the game should feel effortless. In contrast, if I give a different type of chess advice, for example, I give advice on where to put rooks. Rooks belong on open files.
right,
That advice does not need to be accessible in your mind all the time. You just wait till most of your pieces are developed, and then you realize your rooks are still sleeping, and then that's the trigger to think of the advice. Where the rooks
right,
belong, they belong on open files, yes, and that's
right,
settled. But in calculation, there's no trigger. A tactic can emerge without you even noticing. And
Right.
so the technique that is taught must be sufficiently robust to handle that.
Uh-huh. And then maybe let's start talking about the technique, right? Because there are several points. For example, I don't think you preach this brute force, blind, checks, captures, threat algorithm, right? Which to my mind is complete like trial and error and like blind process, basically.
Yes, yes. And in fact, this would be a good chance to talk about how I am critical of calculation techniques. So showing examples of how checks, captures, and threats work isn't sufficient. Because if you want something that's truly robust, you have to try to disprove it, try to find instances where it fails. So when someone claims they are using a specific technique, you need to ask yourself first, how do they act when there are false signals? And second, what do they do when they make a mistake using the technique? And I can use different pieces of advice here, different calculation advice, and then I'll break it down and show you how I would be critical of them. So, John, I'm sure you have heard of the advice. When you see a good move, look for better.
Yes.
So when would false signals happen for this advice?
Uh, you mean like what exactly do you mean by force signals? Like when it disproves itself?
When you're trying to use the technique, but
Yeah.
that technique does not yield you any better results.
Ah, you mean like, oh, okay, well, I see a mate in two. Apparently, there's a mate in one that I missed. That was even faster that I missed. But I find mate in two. I'm confident. I'm just going for it. I don't need to spend half an hour trying to search for mate in one.
Exactly. Now, mates are quite convenient because it ends the game already. So there's no a mate in seven is technically not any worse than a mate in one if you
Right.
calculated it perfectly. But yes, a false signal happens for this piece of advice every time your first instinct was the best move. Because you're thinking of the best move already, but then you'll be like, okay, this is a good move. Let me look for better, but there's no better move already.
Right.
And I believe even 1400 rated players on chess.com, they are finding the best move easily 50% of the time. And it's much higher for a master. And I don't think a master can honestly say that they are interrupting their intuition on every move, looking for a better move. And
Right.
even then, even if they do that, on the occasion they play the second best or third best move, how often does that advice actually help them find a better move? I think
Yeah.
it's extremely rare and it's a lot of energy for nothing.
That's generally
So,
true.
yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Continue, please.
Yeah, so I think the advice when you see a good move, look for better is invalid on its own. If there's some additional supporting elements for this technique, we can reconsider. But the advice on its own, I don't think is working.
How does it connect to check capture threat? Because that's so common. Whenever you look at people just preach, you must look at check captures threats. Right, which sometimes
Yeah,
works if you really feel like it's a critical moment, you smell like there's something, then they say, okay, just be systematic, look at every single check, look at every single capture, look at it. But that usually works in isolated domains, to my mind, maybe tactics books, and also you can lose on time. That's the drawback as well, yeah, with that mechanism. Is that something similar also what you were saying before, that
exactly.
this
Yeah,
fails? Yeah. Yeah.
completely. My first issue of checks, captures, and threats are the loads on loads of false signals you get. Because I'm going to call it CCT for short. CCT presupposes the presence of a tactic. So it's
Right.
not practical to use it every move of the game. In fact, John, do you play E4?
I used to, but now I'm a d4 player mostly. Yes.
All right, I'm going to play a blindfold game with you, all right? And I'd like you to
Okay.
start with E4, okay?
E4. Yes.
I'll play D5.
Okay. E takes d5.
Did you consider bishop B5 check?
Ah, no, I did not. Didn't cross my mind.
Exactly. Yeah, so checks, if you're consistent using checks, captures, and threats, you would consider bishop b5 check. And
Interesting.
checks fall on a spectrum from clearly bad, like bishop b5 check, and there are clearly good checks, like a kiss of death, queen checkmate. And somewhere in between are going to be those speculative, ridiculous looking queen sacrifices with check that actually work. And the purpose of checks, captures, and threats is to help you find those kinds of checks you wouldn't have otherwise considered. So
Right.
for the technique to work, you must push past your initial reticence and seriously explore checks you think are nonsense. Otherwise, the technique is not serving its purpose.
Right.
And you might say that if you're going to ignore bishop b5, that's a bit of discretion involved. But the way I see it, if a calculation system requires you to regularly use your discretion, then it defeats the whole purpose of a system. Imagine a student goes up to his coach and he says, "Hey coach, how do I improve my intuition and calculation?" And the coach says, "Well, you got to start looking for checks, captures, and threats, but be smart about it. Don't waste too much time." And the student asks, "How do I be smart about it?" And the coach says, "Well, you need good intuition and calculation." You see, if you have to excessively exercise your own discretion to execute the system well, then you wouldn't need the calculation system at all because your discretion will be that good.
I see. We are sort of similar in this sense, by the way. I'm also on your side of things when it comes to calculation. I have evolved to be more on that side of things over the years, for sure. But then to me, it means, you must be very good at reading the tactical cues from the environment and smelling whether tactic exists or not, right? That seems to be a better method to me than this brute force check capture threat. Then maybe that's my next question to you. Because then do you preach certain signals from the board? For example, loose pieces or unprotected pieces or certain alignments. What do you preach your students to look at when calculating them?
What I preach is the burger technique, where you establish context first, then you look for moves. And this is broken down into 3 steps. The first is counting material on both sides. And generally, you're identifying material imbalance. The second is you identify targets. I'll speak a little bit about that later.
Yeah.
And the last one is calculate moves. So the first 2, material count and targets, is the context you need. And then once you have that context, calculating moves should be really easy. Because most people make the mistake of being too eager to calculate moves. And that's the big flaw of checks, captures, and threats. If the best move is defensive, you would have been too eager to calculate all the checks, captures, and threats and never arriving at the best move.
Right.
So I'm going to break down these 3 steps. And it actually might be time to put up some positions.
Yes, please. We have learned best with such concrete examples.
All right, so we got this position, and we're going to break down each step. So for material count, you can use John Bartholomew's method. Do you know his method of material count?
Let's see. I'm not 100% sure, actually. How does he count material?
He can look at the chess position and in 1 second tell you the material imbalance because he has a method of doing a cancellation. So at a glance, he will see that black's H, G, and F pawns correspond to white's H, G, and E pawns, and then the 3 queenside pawns for 3 queenside pawns.
Right.
2 bishops, 1 knight, queen, 2 rooks, and then he'll conclude, okay, it's equal. And he does this all so quickly that in 1 second he can tell you this position has equal material.
Right.
He's got videos where he solves tactics. But I digress a bit. So that is the first step taken care of. And the reason you want to establish material count is that it can answer questions like, is perpetual check a good idea? Or if you're up material and you're defending, how much material can you sacrifice for defense?
Yeah.
Now, the second step will be looking at tactical targets. There are many different types of tactical targets, and it expands indefinitely. That's because chess is an infinite game. So for you to be prepared for infinite possibilities, you need a repertoire of targets that can be expanding. So for simplicity now, let's say that the 2 main types of targets are unprotected pieces and exposed lines towards the enemy king. So an unprotected piece will be any piece with 0 attackers and 0 defenders. And what do we have here?
Yes, I'm seeing the bishop on c4 as unprotected. 0 attackers, 0 defenders, for sure.
Perfect. And then the next one will be exposed lines to the enemy king.
Exposed lines to the enemy king. Okay. So that's the second signal, so to speak, yeah, that you look at.
Yes. And when you mentally highlight both of these targets, that line towards the enemy king,
and the loose bishop,
the answer presents itself.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, this is one of those positions where both my technique and checks, captures, and threats work successfully.
That's right.
And so, I'm going to show some tiebreaker positions that show why checks, captures, and threats can be unsuccessful in some positions. So, yet again, we want to look out for, first of all, the material count. So if we do a cancellation method, we've got the 4 pawns on the king side for both. We've got one extra pawn on the queen side.
Yes.
The queens cancel out. One pair of rooks cancel out. And all that remains is our extra rook, extra knight, and they have two bishops.
That's right.
So now the next step is to identify targets.
Let's do it together. I mean, again, lose bishop on f4, lose bishop on c4. That's what I'm seeing.
Yeah,
And even the queen, you also look at every single piece, yeah? Even the queen
exactly.
on g7 is loose, basically. The rook is well protected by the king and the bishop. You also do it for the pawns, yeah? Even for the pawns, you do the process.
Yes, now that's a more nuanced process, but yes, you do it for
Right,
the pawns as well.
right.
You've got, say, the e7 pawn, you've got the h8 rook, you've got the
That's
a2
right.
pawn.
That's right. Yeah, that pawn is protected currently. Although, I mean, it's attacked once and protected only once, yeah? You also call these pawns as
Yes.
undefended, literally undefended.
Well, that's a technique or that's a step I'll get to later.
Let's do it together. Yes, yes. I see. Okay, so these are my observations so far. Should I even think out loud as black in this position? Do you want me to
For
tell you some
sure. Yeah.
ideas? Yeah. Okay, so material count we did. We looked at the targets, and he also set lines against the enemy king, but I don't see a direct lines against the enemy king. It looks irrelevant at this position actually, compared to the first position, which is definitely argues for your check capture threat algorithm. There is no natural check in this position for black. And it's now I'm actually looking at the move queen d4 because this is a direct consequence of identifying those two loose bishops on the board. So I'm
Exactly.
excited about this candidate on queen d4. Why not create a double attack on those bishops, right?
Exactly.
And obviously, before I make a move like this, I should also see whether the opponent can have a direct attack against my king, yeah, direct line of attack, for example. It's very important that the pawn on e7 is protected, so there is no queen e7 check. So I make sure that if I play the move queen d4, there is no dangerous check that I'm facing that can distract me from this double attack, so to speak. Yeah, these are my observations so far. My rooks are protected right now, so there is no direct threat I'm facing. So queen d4 looks like a very safe and good move to me right now. We have to play with the queen anyways because it was attacked by the rook. And I don't see any other better move for black actually than queen d4.
Right. Then it's settled. Once
Okay.
again, we identify the targets first. The two bishops are the standout targets here. And our queen's
Yes.
attacked. So that brings us directly to the move that attacks both targets.
I see.
And in doing so, we bypass all the irrelevant captures and checks.
Yes, because if you completely blindly following check capture threat algorithm, then you say that we should also spend some time on checks like this, right? Like if it's completely blind, or like
Yes.
some random captures, maybe like okay, queen takes a2, or what? Yeah. So
And that isn't natural either.
right, right. But for you to see maybe queen d4 better, then you also need to see the other bishop as loose, yeah. Because otherwise you can also let's say play moves like queen c3 easily, because why not attacking a single bishop? But since you identified both targets, then queen d4 naturally becomes a stronger option for us, yeah? And
Exactly.
let's say queen c3. Yes, I see.
In
That's a good point.
general, in general, you're looking to attack two targets at once, or
Right.
attack one target such that it cannot run away.
I see. I see. Okay, so this was also a nice follow-up to the last example.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And as you get better with the technique, what you find is that more and more targets can be gradually excluded from your consideration.
Uh-huh.
And the reason for this is that you develop some heuristics. For example, I can generally say that an unprotected queen is not worth considering because she automatically defends herself from any forking potential.
Right.
You
Right.
can't attack the queen with a bishop, you can't attack it with a rook because it just gets taken.
Yes. I see. That becomes a heuristic
Yeah.
basically. Uh-huh. Also in my course, by the way, I talk about the goal setting process, which is very close to your initial stage that you did. I mean, you have to set your goal properly in the position. You know, are you playing for a mating attack? Are you playing for a stalemate defense? That, of course, implies you count the material. Yeah, you basically have basic goal about the position. But also, are we playing for a positional improvement or a tactical cash in? That's why in my calculation course, there are also positional puzzles. I mixed just like in real game because in real game, no one is telling you whether a tactical solution exists. Sometimes you make a quiet calculation and let's say undermine a square for your piece right? Like mini plan, short mini plans that involve some calculation, but the goal is to improve a piece on a square and not always win something, for example. Yeah. So that was also why I structured the course that way, that a mix of positional puzzles, which
Oh
definitely
yeah.
involve more complexity, of course, because I need to teach them some positional concepts, of course, but I want to simulate a real game environment as much as possible.
John, you raised a very good point about strategic or more positional games. And the question is, what do you do with the calculation technique when you're in those more quiet situations?
Yes.
So if you are using checks, captures, and threats, you're looking at a bunch of useless moves throughout the whole very close position, very close game. However, if you use my technique and you get used to identifying unprotected pieces and exposed lines towards the enemy king, even through the quiet positions, those can prove useful.
Yeah.
Because, you know what, I'm going to play a game. I'm going to
Yes.
play a game. I need a fresh position in this. All right, I'm going to make it up a little bit as I go. So let's say white plays d4.
Okay.
You go c6. White goes bishop g5. So immediately, if you're very used to the technique, you will identify the g5 bishop as unprotected.
That's right.
However, it's not exploitable right now because you combine the unprotected bishop with the exposed line towards white's king, and you get queen to a5 check. That's the
Yes. Queen
point it
a5.
converges. The problem is white has bishop d2.
That's right.
So technically, you could argue that this is a false signal. I identified an unprotected piece, but I couldn't find a tactic. However, the case that I'm making is that energy was not wasted here because the information that the bishop is unprotected on g5 and that you have an exposed line towards the enemy king is still useful
Yeah.
because now you'll be on the lookout. As soon as white plays e3, I know I
Right.
have the bishop.
Right. I see. I see. I see. For example, let's make a random move, and if they play e3 in this position, then we have queen a5.
Exactly. So identifying the targets is still useful, even if
Right.
there's no tactic present, because it can set the way, set the path for future tactics. You have
Absolutely.
more, you have a keener sense for them.
Absolutely.
Or they could even come into positional considerations. For example, if I want to develop a piece a little bit faster, I could try to develop it while attacking an unprotected piece.
I see. Yeah. 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 No, I think you're absolutely correct. Like chess being fundamentally at the core, being a tactical game, right? That's always relevant. Tactics are always relevant. Even in your grandest strategic ideas, still need to be backed up by basic tactics and safety. So these things are always going to be relevant down the line at some point. So 100%. Identifying targets as loose pieces, for example, is always going to be relevant. As John Nunn says, right? LPDO, loose pieces drop off. Maybe not
Exactly.
directly, but at some point they might drop off, actually. They are relevant for sure. But because I'm now working on a blunder check course, actually, I'm now working on a
Okay.
blunder check course, Azel. And also in that course, I want to give people certain heuristics, certain guidelines instead of the typical generic checks, captures, threats. Yeah? Because even if you look at the blunder check process, most coaches will tell you before you make a move, you must make sure the opponent doesn't defeat your move by a check, capture, threat. Right? That's actually
Okay.
like the common norm. If you read, like even big coaches, they keep talking about this. You must make sure they don't defeat your move by check, capture, threat. Just like when you're searching for tactics. So I also try to use different algorithms this time. Yeah, I'm like one big part will be loose pieces. As a result of my move, what am I unprotecting? Am I creating a loose piece? That's always going to be relevant. For example, am I creating an alignment? And that's my question to you. I talk about alignments in the course as well, because most tactics also stem from certain alignments. If you pay attention, yeah, let's say rook and the king is aligned on the same file, and then that allows a certain pin, skewer, or some discover attack down the line, for example. You must make sure before you make a move, am I creating a certain alignment on the board? I think that also connects to your lines of attack against the king. But that doesn't necessarily have to be always the king. Yeah? Sometimes the queen versus rook alignment, for example. Like important pieces are aligned on the same diagonal sometimes. Fianchetto bishop, for example. Sniper bishops. You make a move and the bishop on the other side is aligned with your piece, for example. then you allow that's a blunder because of the very alignment, right? So to me, that alignment word is definitely much more, let's say, concrete and important or easier to implement than look at every single check capture threat. Because you see, the problem is the word threat. Threat can mean so many things in chess. Yeah, what is a threat? How do you identify a threat? You can lose on time if you, before you make a move, check for every single threat by the opponent against you at that moment. Yeah, it's a very vague term, this word threat. So by focusing on the alignment part, by looking at the loose pieces part, I try to make it more like manageable, at least. Yeah, so that was also my question to you. Like, you don't use the word alignment in the course, but lines of attack. Yeah, mostly against the king.
I would say that my technique is more a structure of thinking more than giving just very fixed techniques.
Right.
Because again, the case that I make is that chess is infinite and no course can teach you how to solve every single tactic. What my course can teach you is how to have a technique that is infinitely scalable to master, to grandmaster, to world champion level. Because you can expand your definition of what constitutes a target, and then it gets bigger and bigger. And if you want to call it alignment, if you want to call it unprotected pieces, you can have more and more of it in. In fact, I have about 20 positions.
20 positions to show us today. Oh, okay, guys, we are
Yes.
going for 2.5 hours today. I will enjoy it for sure. Yeah, it's White's turn right now.
Yes, it's White's turn. And you know what, John? I'm going to do something very special on this
Yes.
episode today. Something I've never done before.
Cool.
Let's imagine, I want to show the scalability of this technique.
Yeah.
So I want us to imagine a hypothetical superhuman who is presently rated, let's say, 800 on chess.com. And whatever techniques I teach him, he will instantly master it and execute it to near perfection in the future.
Wow.
And by
Nice
the end of
progress
this
there.
episode, maybe he'll be 2200.
Yes, could be.
And so, for you watching at home, it's going to be like a peek into the future. What your improvement will look like from beginner to master, all condensed into one episode.
Love it.
And again, I want to emphasize the point is just to show what the scalability of the burger technique can look like. It's okay to use my technique and get puzzles wrong, because that just means that there are new types of targets that you need to consider.
Yes.
And let's call this hypothetical superhuman Magnus.
Magnus, like Magnus Carlsen. Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Okay.
So right now, what has Magnus learned from me? He has learned to count material. He has learned to identify targets, and the targets are going to be exposed lines towards the enemy king and pieces with 0 attackers and 0 defenders.
Yes. I'm assuming I'm this 800 person right now, Magnus. So
Right.
Magnus learned that exposed lines against the enemy king are like that, and also Magnus learned this bishop on d7 is a loose piece because hit once and guarded only once right now. Yes.
Right.
So Magnus looks at the move rook e7 check naturally.
Yes.
Naturally. Yes. Is Magnus successful?
And the rest is trivial, yes. And even if, let's say, Magnus didn't know to look for pieces with 1 attacker and 1 defender, and so he just never found rook e7 in this position. In the post-game analysis, when he realized that he actually had rook e7,
Right.
what Magnus can say is, oh, now pieces with 1 attacker and 1 defender, or basically the same number of attackers as defenders, should now be counted into step 2 of my burger technique.
Right.
It's an expanding definition here. So now, instead of training his sensitivity to just expose lines to the king, to just pieces with 0 attackers and 0 defenders, he's also going to consider pieces with the same number of attackers as defenders, like this bishop here.
Yes. Yes.
So if he gets it right, good for him. If he got this puzzle wrong, that's a new lesson learned.
I see. This has ramifications of how to analyze our games, by the way. So that's also interesting.
Oh,
Yeah?
yes.
You can get those lessons, even with engine feedback, basically, if you're careful about why that move was powerful at that point. Then you can enlarge your base. I see. Yes.
Completely. Now let me fish out the next position.
So it's black to play. Oh, okay. This is a more complex position. Magnus might get confused here, a little bit overwhelmed, perhaps. But yes, let's do the cancellation technique. No, like let's count the material right now.
Right.
As you preached us, it's black to play. So what I'm seeing is that black has an extra piece in his position, an extra knight, in fact.
Yes.
And the queen is of course under fire on e8.
Mm-hmm.
And let's apply your method. So lines against the enemy king, let's say. Well, I'm only seeing a potential back rank issue perhaps down the line on the first rank. And if you look at the unprotected pieces, then this knight on c7 is unprotected. This bishop on c4, Magnus learned it's also an unprotected piece right now because it's hit once, guarded only once by the queen. Well, what else? These pieces are all protected. This is also protected.
Yeah.
The
And in
threat is
fact,
the queen, of course, yes?
yeah, on the point of the back rank being a potential line towards the enemy king, we can still say that every square on the back rank has more defenders than attackers,
Aha, I
and
see.
therefore it's overprotected.
It's overprotected. Yes, yes, yes. Which means there's a less likely chance that that can be exploited, basically.
Exactly.
Right. So Magnus now sees the bishop as a loose piece, the knight is a loose piece. So Magnus starts seeing the move queen c6 in this position. At least if I were Magnus, I would definitely spend some time on this move queen c6, which hits the loose knight, while also hits the loose bishop on c4 at that moment.
Now here's where Magnus may get a little bit concerned because this move isn't a strong, loud move like a check. It's pretty quiet. So white has multiple possibilities to defend.
Yeah.
We don't know what they are yet, but we know that white probably has some hocus pocus.
Yes.
So what Magnus can do is look at his own pieces. What targets does he have?
Yeah. So the black's unprotected pieces is definitely the rook on b8 in this case. That's unprotected. Well, the others are all protected to my mind. Yeah, all of them are actually protected. I'm looking at the pawn on f7, obviously, because of the line of attack, potentially, the battery, but it's well guarded. Everything else is well guarded. The bishop, these knights. And this leaves me with rook b8, which means when Magnus plays queen c6, now I'm seeing the potential counter-attacking move knight a6 by white. That might, use the pin while also hitting the loose rook on b8, right?
Yes.
So this becomes my line to calculate, let's say. Right.
So from there,
c6, knight a6. Yeah, let's go on. We can even go one ply deeper, yeah? We can even, okay, Magnus keeps on calculating. It becomes a 5-ply line probably. So queen c6. Should I put arrows, by the way? Should I move the pieces?
Arrows are
those
great.
squares?
Arrows are great.
Arrows are great. Okay, queen c6, knight a6. What Magnus looks at is, well, what if I simply take that knight and allow queen takes b8? Because what I'm seeing is that even if that's allowed, I'm capturing the bishop on c4 on the next turn, right? So to my mind, I want two minor pieces for the rook. I was already up a minor piece from the first position. So my evaluation would be at that point, white is simply winning because of extra material, basically.
Exactly, and that's the answer. And we can see all the steps of the technique coming together. First, the material count establishes that we have an advantage. So even just some normal traits or just a slight material gain is going to be very beneficial for us. The second thing is we have identified targets and we have expanded our definition of targets to include pieces like the c4 bishop. From the first two puzzles where we never looked at unprotected pieces with, say, one attacker and one defender, now because of the previous puzzle, Magnus is aware c4 ought to be counted as a target.
Correct.
And then after queen c6, he may have some concerns as to what possibilities white has.
Right.
And then the way to know what the weaknesses are is to flip it around. What are my unprotected pieces? In this case, there is only the b8 rook.
That's right.
And so there are other concerns like you might have about the e7 bishop, but I can see the e7 bishop has one defender and 0 attackers. So I'm not worried about the bishop. I only need to worry about the rook.
That's right. Otherwise, maybe you would spend some time on moves like knight e5 too, right? Because that will be hitting your loose bishop on e7.
Exactly. And I'm not sure there's a convenient way to save the bishop while still getting white c4 bishop.
Yeah. So immediately you start looking at the opponent's resources given the targets in your camp. That's a direct application of the same technique. Yes, 100%. Yeah, it's transferable to the opponent as well. As they say, yeah, in chess we always have to search for the best moves for both sides at all times, as if you're playing with white pieces. Yeah, literally, like imagine queen c6 will be placed on the board, then what's the best move for white? What should white look at? What are white's targets? And so on and so on. Yeah. Then you look at moves
Exactly.
like knight a6, obviously. That's their targets, potentially. So in my blunder check course, this will be an alignment. You see, like I would say, yeah, black must be mindful about the alignment on the b file, right? That's how my vocabulary would say, for example. Yeah, the important pieces, let's say, are aligned on the file, but obviously the rook being a loose piece is very important for this alignment. If this rook would be protected, then the same alignment would not be so powerful. Yeah, so that also actually implies that there's some problem going on on one of those pieces that are aligned on the file.
That's a great
Yes.
point, John.
Yeah.
And this adds to the technique because it's possible that after Queen c6, Magnus saw the unprotected b8 rook,
Yes.
but didn't realize that white had knight a6 as a possibility. And so if he failed to see knight a6, that's where he can expand his definition on how to identify targets. Not just unprotected pieces, but their vulnerability comes from certain alignments.
Right.
So you
Right.
see, this repertoire of targets is getting bigger and bigger.
Yeah. 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 So that's how it stems, and then you can make it bigger and bigger. But by the way, why is it called the burger again? Maybe I misunderstood it, or I don't see the analogy so nicely. Yeah. Why is the burger?
Right, so with the burger, with the standard burger, you've got the top bun, you've got all the good stuff in the middle, and then you've got
Uh-huh.
the bottom layer. So the top bun is kind of a formality where you're counting material, and that represents the first step. But you still need
Okay.
it. You can't just be grabbing all the ingredients from the top. And the middle layer represents the second step where you're identifying targets. And you notice how I keep talking about how you would have more and more targets over time.
Uh-huh.
And that's where all the good stuff of the burger is. So the burger
I
gets
see.
taller and taller.
I see.
And once you identify targets correctly, candidate moves become very easy to spot. In the same way, once the middle layer of the burger is fantastic, all that good juice flows down to the bottom bun, and the bun also tastes good. Not because it's
Yeah.
not because it's any special bread, but because of all the ingredients before that.
Yeah. Sorry if there are any vegetarians in our audience, but
It can be
I
a
guess
vegan burger.
it can be a vegan burger as well, right? All of you are welcome, guys, to eat this juicy burger. But okay, so that's the analogy. Yeah. Let's go on. Let's go on. Give us more positions, Azel. I mean,
All
I'm enjoying it
right.
so much, and hopefully our audience will love it too. So yeah, step by step, we are building this burger.
Yeah.
Let's
Now,
see.
one criticism I can anticipate is that how is it possible for you to expand your repertoire of targets indefinitely and then somehow have the mental capacity for that?
Yes, the working
It,
memory is overwhelmed. Yeah, it's a limited resource, our working memories. How do you make sure it doesn't get overwhelmed with all this information to look at?
my point is, you won't get overwhelmed with enough practice. And the reason I can say this is that you're not consciously thinking of targets. Everybody knows how to look for back rank checkmates.
Right.
And yet, it doesn't have to be at the forefront of your mind. It's deep in there, in a huge pool of patterns that you recognize. Anytime a back rank happens, you're not constantly asking yourself on move one, on move two, is there back rank checkmate? No. Is there back rank checkmate?
No.
No. Until suddenly move 27, is there back rank checkmate? Yes. And then you go for it. It's just that you've gotten so familiar with back rank mates that it's stored somewhere in your mind in a pool of basically infinite capacity, such that as soon and you get so good at recognizing it that as soon as it presents itself, you're ready to fire.
Yeah, it's an automatic process. Just pops from the background.
Exactly.
Yep.
Now, interestingly, this is a position that Magnus cannot solve yet.
Oh, wait, why? Because Magnus, let me guess. Because Magnus doesn't yet know the the loose square concept or what? Or maybe I just confused myself. Magnus, Magnus looks at the line of attack against the king, as you mentioned. And in this case, in the first example, the back rank was protected, all the squares. And that's why
Yeah.
Magnus didn't even look at there. In this case, this is not protected, this a8 square, and this knight is loose. So if I were Magnus, I would be thrilled to engage in this short calculation and go to a8 with my rook in 2 moves. Do you mean Magnus doesn't know any checkmate patterns yet, or what? Is that your point?
Magnus, it's my point. Magnus has yet to learn any checkmating patterns.
I thought he got the Chessable course, checkmate patterns manual. Magnus, okay, it's just a joke. All right, so that has to be studied separately, those checkmate patterns.
Yeah, and I'm saying that checkmate patterns fit perfectly with this expanding repertoire of targets that you can build. So right now, all Magnus can see is the unprotected a3 knight.
Yes.
There's no second target for him to exploit in his mind as far as he's concerned. Because he can't recognize back rank checkmate. So say he misses the opportunity to play rook a1 here.
Yeah. Let's say he makes some random move. Yeah.
Yeah, so he made a mistake here. And then in the post-game analysis, it is revealed to him that he had rook a1 to attack the a3 knight and the a8 square. And the a8 square leads to checkmate.
Yes.
So now this is going to count as a new input into the calculation system. And the way that you do it is first you need to find key features to recognize. In this case, the key feature would be 3 pawns in front of the enemy king.
Yes.
And then once you have those key features, that's not enough. You need to associate it with a critical line or a critical square. Now in this case, the critical line would be anything spanning from a8 to e8.
Right.
You can think of those squares as unprotected. They have 0 attackers, 0 defenders. If you could attack it and you landed there, you would not win something on the square. You'd have checkmate.
That's right. Loose squares, yeah? A piece can be loose, but also a square itself can be loose or unprotected. That's very important. Yeah, and many beginners actually don't evolve the concept yet. That takes some time for some beginners to understand, yeah? To see certain squares is loose. Or we can attack a particular square instead of a specific piece on the board. That's very important too.
Yes.
Yeah.
And because of his superhuman abilities, he is now exceptionally aware of back rank checkmates and unprotected pieces that he is ready to solve this next puzzle.
Yeah, it's white to play again, I believe. Cool. Okay, so let's see how Magnus will do. I have an intuition about this. Yes. That's a more advanced version for sure, but the same thought process. Yes. So I will pretend that I'm Magnus. I won't tell the solution directly. But since Magnus learned the back rank motifs, and Magnus also understood that even though the pawn on h7 is moved, the bishop is actually stopping king h7 in this case. Well, first of all, of course, we have the material count. Yeah, it's equal material. That was the first step.
Yep.
Oh, well, maybe I'm actually wrong. Maybe black has an extra pawn right now, yeah?
There's a pawn, yes.
Black has an extra pawn. Okay, that's important. That might be important at some point. Then we look at some lines of attack against the king. Well, in this case, since we learned the back rank mating motif, our attention is definitely on this back rank potentially. Because if a piece lands on the back rank, this king will be mated because the bishop is stopping king h7s. Right? So that's information for us. Loose pieces.
Well,
this bishop. Yeah, sorry, Azel. Just
crucially,
correct me. Yes.
Crucially, most of the squares on the back rank are not considered critical. This is because they have more defenders than attackers.
That's right.
The only square that has the same number of attackers as defenders on the back rank is the a8 square itself.
Is a8.
F8 I want to count
How about
because it's defended. Yeah.
Because it's already defended by the rook. I see.
Yes.
That's the only square that that has the equal number of attackers and defenders. Yeah. Yeah, because the queen covers those 3, the rook covers f8, the king
there's one more.
covers e8, and there's also more. B8. There's also b8. The rook covers b8. That's right.
Well, but we have a rook on b1 ready to go to b8.
That's true.
a8 has 0 attackers, 0 defenders. b8 has 1 attacker and 1 defender.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that makes 2 unprotected spots, or 2 critical squares, you could put it that way. It's A8 and B8.
100%. Yeah. And also the bishop on d4 being a loose piece is very important in this case. Yeah. Because then I'm already like try to find ways to combine these things that you mentioned with the loose bishop. Since I know that this rook already needs to guard b8, I would call this rook like a tied down piece. It needs to protect this particular square on b8 in this case. Then I'm already thinking about removing the guard kind of tactics. Yeah, I'm looking at moves like queen a4, for example. The idea is to create a double attack. Yeah, attacking the loose bishop, but
Exactly.
also attacking the rook on a8, which is totally tied down in guarding this particular square on b8 in this case.
Completely. You
Yeah,
attack two unprotected pieces, and you're
right.
trying to remove a defender of the critical b8 square.
Yeah, 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 yeah. It's beautiful because there is no way for the rook to move and also guard the bishop. The queen already hits a8. That's a huge threat. And already here, yeah, there is
Yep.
nothing. Obviously, knight e3 check is the only check maybe we can look at, right? In terms of thought process. Yeah, am I blundering a queen directly on that square? Can they create double attack and take our queen with some other piece, perhaps? Right? For example, if the king was on d1 here, or the queen actually moved from, yeah. If the king was on d1 here, Azel, right?
hmm
That would be a blunder because you will allow a move like knight c3 check.
Yep.
Yeah. So how does your system also take care of such blunders, basically?
The queen would be considered unprotected.
Aha.
Or you could also add a new rule for forking range. Get
The
familiar
forking
with
range. Yeah.
every pair of squares that a knight could attack two at once.
Right. Right. That's what I'm working on these days in my blunder check course. Should I have a separate category for forks, knight forks or pawn forks, certain geometries that allow such forks? Yeah, but you can expand on it, as you mentioned, given the system.
Right. So if say there were a king on d1 to begin with,
Yes?
the c3 square would technically be hanging at the starting
Aha.
position.
Interesting. So you would call, even though the queen was on c2, you would call this square as a hanging square.
Yes, because the threat is present. It's not a
Aha.
potential threat.
I see. I see. Because the queen is a much higher value piece than a knight. So this will be a real threat to worry about, yeah?
Yes.
That's your
And
point.
another way to prove it is if I were to remove the c2 queen and I remove the d4 bishop and the king's on d1, knight c3 would be a real threat.
Yes, 100%. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So then you would already, let's say, put some attention to that knight c3 point more with the king on d1 versus king on g2, obviously, yeah?
Exactly.
Uh-huh, uh-huh, uh-huh. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But this is a beautiful point. So now you say Magnus can do this kind of tactics, given what you learned
Yes.
so far. Right. Just to show you guys, this is just going to be mate on the next turn because of the back rank. For those of you who doesn't see it, that's beautiful. Otherwise, after queen a4, let's say rook moves somewhere, we just take the free bishop on d4. There are no counter checks. Right. By the way, I would still call this alignment in my blunder check course. Yeah.
For sure.
As a result of taking the bishop, you're actually creating an alignment on the d file. Your queen becomes a loose piece on d4, and there are some
Yeah.
knight jumps. Right. There are some knight frog possibilities.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
But not
if
doesn't work for
say,
black, of course.
yeah, but if say it worked and Magnus made a huge blunder,
Yeah.
now he can add a new, yet more information to his technique. And he could say that when you capture a barely hanging piece, the resulting piece that's captured there becomes unprotected.
Interesting. Yeah, just like in queen takes d4, yeah?
Yeah,
The moment you take that hanging bishop, your piece that just captured becomes a loose piece or hanging piece in your definition. This piece on d4.
it becomes an unprotected piece.
Unprotected piece. That's correct. Yes. Which means there must be some consideration to look at the opponent's counter moves against your move. Yeah,
Yep.
just like we did before. The rook on b8 was loose, and Magnus looked at the counter move, knight a6. More or less the same thing. I'm about to capture that free bishop, but before I capture it, I need to make sure that this loose piece on d4 cannot be exploited by the opponent. Right. Cool. Cool, cool.
And there you
Are
have
there
it. You can,
any more?
yeah,
Yeah.
you can see Magnus's rating climbing in real time.
Oh, Magnus is getting so much stronger already in half an hour, guys. As you see.
Yeah.
Please give me feedback, by the way, my
Yeah.
subscribers on YouTube after you watch this session.
Yeah, I
I'm
know
very curious about it.
these look like a lot of lessons, but really it's all the lessons you're learning over maybe 4 years to get from 800 to 2200 condensed into one episode, which is why there
Yeah.
seems to be so many considerations within a short period of time.
Black to play. Okay, so let's apply the methods. Magnus is getting stronger. Equal material right now. What else is Magnus seeing in this position? Let me quickly get this going. Yeah, well, in my book, I always look at the opponent's threats, but let's apply your technique first of all. Look at loose pieces. The bishop on f3 is protected. Lines of attack against the king, well, I mean, maybe this diagonal, but it's already well guarded. I don't really see anything there. And the rook on a1 is a loose piece. Well, the pawn, did Magnus learn yet? The pawns being loose pawns, for example. Attacked once, guarded only once.
He probably
By
could
the rook.
infer that. He probably could infer that.
He
So
probably could infer that so far. Okay. Yes. So far, Magnus has no concept of, let's say, passed pawns in chess. This is a protected passed pawn, for example. That he doesn't look at such positional concepts, perhaps.
yeah.
Like, yeah.
And you know what, John, in the interest of speed here, I'm just going to quickly conclude that Magnus has no way of solving this position
Okay. Interesting.
because he only knows how to identify the A1 rook and A2 pawn both unprotected. And there's no way to really exploit that right now.
Yes.
So if he misses this in his game, he's going to look at the post-game analysis and he's going to see that actually he had knight to C2.
Oof, yes, now I saw it, by the way. Now I saw the beautiful follow-up to this, guys. Knight c2, the main point is knight e1. And that knight is actually able to dislodge the protector of the bishop on f3. I just created a very similar puzzle to this one, by the way, for my Blunders check course. Almost identical. The knight is somehow finding a way to go to e1 and just capture the bishop on f3, which looks at first sight very protected, right? It's actually ultra protected, like attack 0 times and guarded already once by the king. So how can, for a Magnus's eye, this bishop is a tactical liability that we can exploit in 2 moves?
Exactly.
Beautiful.
So
It's beautiful.
he couldn't have solved this, but now that he's aware of it, he's going to expand his repertoire of tactical targets. So just as you would see a rook on the back rank as a critical line to deliver back rank checkmate, we can say that in this configuration, when the fianchettoed king is defending a bishop and there are these 2 pawns in the way, f2 and g3,
Yeah,
we can say that e1 is a critical square for a knight.
correct.
Potentially h4, but that's a lower chance.
Yes. Yes.
We can say e1 is a critical square because the bishop will hang all of a sudden.
That's actually one of those geometrical motifs that you have to learn. Yes, you're like one of those knight patterns. As they say, knights are crazy tricky pieces. One of those cases, guys. I mean, first of all, knights on the queen side. The bishop looks very protected. Like, how can this knight e1 idea be so relevant here? Right? It's like we humans sometimes have a hard time catching the knight jumps and knight geometries, yeah?
Exactly.
Truly understanding them. It's just so amazing.
Yeah, but as you get familiar, you know what? This is actually very similar. You remember that very basic puzzle I gave you, where it's rook a1 to attack the a3 knight, and then it's mate on a8. It has this position, and that one has the same level of depth.
Exactly. Only 3 ply depth. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, and yet this one seems to be a lot harder to solve. And the reason it seems harder to solve is that it's a rarer pattern.
Yep. Exactly.
The case that I'm making is that if you can get familiar with these patterns just as you would a back rank checkmate, and then you can solve these kind of positions as effortlessly as you can solve back rank mate puzzles.
Yes. It's all about accumulating those patterns and chunks. So
Exactly.
now Magnus learned this pattern. Would you then recommend Magnus to go to Chessable and space rep or like woodpecker these kind of knight
Do
flows
that,
over and over again?
yes. But in this example, he's superhuman, so he has already mastered this pattern. And he's ready for the next one.
Is it white to play, Azel?
Yeah, it's white to play.
Okay. So let's see. Well, Magnus sees it's equal material and well, if you look at the loose pieces directly in this case, then this bishop is loose. This bishop is also loose because attacked once and guarded only once by the rook. this rook is already under fire right now by the knight. But if I take that rook, I'm also seeing this bishop will capture my rook on h8.
Right.
So that will be an equal trade.
Yes. And Magnus is already aware from previous positions that the ideal scenario to be in is for him to have 2 threats on the opponent and the opponent to have 0 threats on him.
Yeah.
So now it's 1-1. He's got 1 threat on the opponent. The opponent has 1 threat on him. To get from 1-1 to 2-0, the question would be, how can I save my rook while creating a new threat?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That becomes the key question. I have to find a way to move my rook, which is attacked by the bishop, to a square that I can actually also create a threat. So I will add one more threat to my existing one of knight takes a8.
Yes.
And obviously I'm seeing the loose bishop on d4. And this prompts Magnus, to at least look at the move rook h4. That becomes a candidate move to consider in this case.
Let's even play it out. Let's put.
Yes.
So right now the opponent realizes he's in a 2-0 situation. 2 pieces hanging, and he's got 0 targets, 0 attack on the enemy, 0 attack on white.
Yes.
So the question for black is, what are white's targets, and how can I save one of my hanging pieces to attack another?
Nice. Because the rook on h4 is a loose piece, and this bishop is attacked, very naturally, bishop should at least try this sequence, that I'm saving my bishop with a counter-attack on your rook, which was loose on h4. Yes.
Correct. And now the same thought process is repeated. How can I move my rook while creating a new threat? Now this part is a little bit trickier here.
Right.
But Magnus, being the superhuman that he is, has already perfectly internalized the pattern from the previous puzzle.
Magnus know that potential knight fork pattern that is coming.
Yes. So he has seen the king on e7 with the bishop on f6 and the 2 pawns on e6 and f7. That chunk there means that g8 is critical.
That's right.
And potentially d5, but is currently defended once.
Exactly.
So d5, d5 and g8 are both unprotected. g8 has 0 attackers, 0 defenders. d5 has 1 attacker, that's the knight, and 1 defender, which is the e6 pawn.
Yes.
So can you add an attacker or remove a defender from d5 while moving the rook?
Beautiful. Now obviously Magnus sees the move rook e4 because it actually creates this second threat of knight d5 check, which given Magnus's pattern recognition will pick up the bishop on f6 on the next turn. So I'm saving my rook with in fact creating a threat of knight d5. And since this was my first threat, knight a8, I'm creating a double threat actually. With knight
exactly.
d4.
Yeah. And I'm really using Magnus not just to demonstrate the technique, but also show what fast improving players look like. Now I have this concept that I've created. I call it the pattern continuum. And for this, I would need a new tab, a new Lichess tab with custom pieces. I just want to move pieces around illegally.
Yeah, sure. I can just give you whatever, like clear board, and you can just...
Right, let's just have a simple back rank checkmate. Just black pawns on f7, g7, h7. And say a white rook on b8.
On b8, let's say. Let's put it this way. Yes.
Correct. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a bit about the pattern continuum. It is a multi-dimensional data set, and it contains all possible chess puzzles. Again, this is very conceptual and abstract. And these puzzles are organized based on their tactical or strategic similarities. So similar positions are densely packed and connected. So if I have this puzzle here, which is rook b8 checkmate, if I have a puzzle that's rook to c8 checkmate, those 2 points in this data set are very close to each other.
Right.
And if, say, I change this position a bit more, if I move the h pawn to h6.
Okay, it's moving to h6.
I have the rook on b8 still. And I have a bishop on d3.
Yes.
Now this position is a little bit further away from the original 2, where you just have a b8 and c8 checkmate.
Right.
right? And then I can further mutilate this position. I can remove the f pawn and remove the bishop.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I'll even remove the h6 pawn.
Okay.
I'll put a knight on g5,
Knight on g5.
a white knight on g5.
A white knight on g5, of course. And we just mate it.
Yes, and this
Mm-hmm.
position is even further away from the original checkmate in this data set
Yes.
because it's a bit more different, and the positions again are clustered by how similar they look.
I see. I see.
And I could completely change the position, or looks like I'm completely changing the position. Put the knight on e7.
Mm-hmm.
The black king to h7,
Sort of
and the white
Anastasia's
rook on
mate.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This is even further away. And chess literature arbitrarily categorizes this as a new pattern, Anastasia's mate. But
Right.
you know, in this undulating conceptual continuum, there are no borders drawn to distinguish these two patterns.
True. True.
And it's arbitrary because when there's a kiss of death in one direction, if you rotate it 90 degrees, you don't call it a different type of kiss of death.
Yeah.
But for
That's right.
Anastasia and back rank, they're somehow different. It's not a criticism, by the way. It's just an observation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And with this checkmate, we can go back even more steps to the classic queen sacrifice Anastasia's mate. You know that one where you've got the king on g8, the
Yeah.
pawns on f7, h7. Maybe the knight is back on d5.
Yes. 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 So how it starts again? Like maybe, is it?
Yeah, like this, and the rook is further back. The h1
Exactly.
rook has to be somewhere else.
Let's put it here. Yeah. Just for the sake of argument. Yes. So basically, guys, like I can't make. Yeah. Let's even put some king here and put it on the analysis board. Yeah. Yes. In this case, for example, for you to execute this mate, you start with this check, and then comes the queen sacrifice on h7, followed by rook h1 mate. Yes. Anastasia's checkmate. Here. A typical pattern.
Right, and by the way, you can see the gradual evolution from a standard back rank checkmate to this relatively complex queen sacrifice Anastasia's mate.
Right.
And the point I'm driving at is every time you learn a pattern, you're not just learning to solve one particular puzzle. In this continuum, whatever first position you see, in this case, it was that rook b8 back rank checkmate, there's a whole sphere of positions that you have learned to solve. And the radius of this sphere is how fast you improve as a chess player. So the slowest improving chess player in the world would recognize the rook b8 back rank checkmate, but would not recognize rook c8 back rank checkmate.
I see. Yeah.
If you're a little bit more extreme, you could probably, if the h pawn were not around, but then you have a bishop that controls h7, maybe you could recognize that as well. And Magnus, in all his glory, could see that rook b8 checkmate once, and then suddenly know how to solve this Anastasia's mate.
Yes. So Magnus would have a much better transfer, right? He could be able to perceive the deeper similarities between those patterns. That even though they look a little bit different, Magnus would see the underlying similarity of the pattern, and he could apply it to different contexts that show deeper similarities, basically.
Exactly. And so
Yeah.
with that new pattern we saw, with the fianchettoed king and the f3 bishop,
Yes.
you can see how it can appear in a vastly, vastly different looking context.
That's true. That's true.
And with the last two puzzles we have seen.
Yeah. For example, in this case, yeah, there are moves like knight h5 in this case, and so on and so on.
Exactly.
That,
and if the king were on e7 and the pawn were on e6, that's a new pattern. Or rather, that's a related pattern.
Yeah. Yeah. For example, you would love to get a knight on d5 in a position like this, right? Exactly. Yeah.
So the points I'm driving at are use a technique that is scalable because you want to prepare yourself to scale this technique to master level and beyond. And the second thing is, for this scalability to function well, every new pattern you learn it very, very seriously. You never really know a pattern because this sphere of understanding can always get bigger and bigger. And instead of learning one pattern to solve 1,000 puzzles, you're solving 100,000 puzzles.
Yeah.
And beyond that, not all patterns are geometrical, as we have seen here. A pattern that you learn in chess can be conceptual. And I have two more puzzles to demonstrate that.
Please show us some conceptual patterns. Yes. Cool. So now we will learn a conceptual pattern in this position.
Yes. Now, in the interest of speed, I'm going to give the solution here. So if you want to try it yourself, now we can pause it.
Yes,
Otherwise, here's the answer. So one thing you're noticing is that F1 is critical. Mostly because you can kind of nudge the king around, and it has more attackers than defenders. The second thing you notice is that the c4 queen is unprotected. 0 attackers, 0 defenders.
Yes.
And this leads to the solution. Rook f1 check. Takes.
Takes.
King h2. Queen c7 check. And with queen c7 check, it's not only a forcing move, but you're also setting up a discovered attack to the c4 queen. So, and this is when you may notice that previous rules that you have developed, you can find exceptions to it. Remember, in the very, very early stages of Magnus's growth, he initially thought that a queen should be able to defend itself.
Yes.
Because it can defend itself in all directions, maybe except with knights. But then now here he has found an exception. If the queen is attacking one of our pieces, that piece can serve as a shield for us to set up a discovered attack.
Right.
So now every time he sees a queen with one of his pieces nearby, his mind can be thinking, how can I get my queen to c7 or anything to the c file and try to set up that attack.
Beautiful. Yeah, it's more like a conceptual pattern.
It is conceptual indeed. And with that, in his infinite wisdom, he will be able to solve this next puzzle.
So it's white to play in this case.
It is white to play, yes.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, so that's how you want to set it up.
We've got f8 unprotected. We've got f3 unprotected.
That's right. So f3 queen is unprotected. f8 is also unprotected. Hit once, guard only once. And our goal, there's also a line of attack against the king, by the way, like that. And
Yes.
So maybe we can use that, to my mind, to set up some sort of a discovery between those queens. So I'm looking at the move like queen b3 in this case, which literally forces bishop f7. Bishop f7 is forced. Otherwise, I just backrank mate you if king h8.
Exactly.
So after bishop f7, it's a very good sign that these three pieces are lined up on the third rank, which allows bishop h7 check, king h7, and then, queen takes f3 at that moment.
And conveniently, after rook takes c8, we have queen f5 check.
That's right. Even in the very end, that's very relevant to see that, yeah. Queen b3, bishop f7. This was the line that I just saw. Magnus hopefully also saw it. That down the line, this rook becomes loose, and line of attack against the king is this.
Yes.
And the queen are the best double attackers. And we pick up the rook on c8. Cool.
Right. And with this, you can see that the last two puzzles I've shown are completely different positions.
Yeah.
And yet the pattern, if understood conceptually, can carry across to this one. Now that I see a queen on f3 that's unprotected, and I've got my d3 bishop in the way, I'm looking to line it up with my queen on b3.
Yeah. It usually works better with bishops, right? Because they are long-range pieces. They can move ahead and maybe give discover checks. I mean, compared to a knight, for example. Knights are short-range, right? The knight on d3 would be very difficult to give a check against the king on the king side, for example. So even such
it would
patterns,
have to be a bit nearer.
Right. Nice one.
Yeah, and with this ties back to the concept on the pattern continuum. When a strong player, when a fast improving prodigy sees that second last position we have seen, they don't just learn the geometry of it, they learn the concept behind it.
Yeah,
and that makes the sphere of chess positions they can now solve much, much larger.
Yeah. Because there's a much higher chance of occurrence with the such conceptual patterns. There are way more positions that will show the deeper conceptual similarity than the precise piece placement similarities, geometrical similarities, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so with this, we have seen how Magnus, starting from completely nothing, 800, is able to now solve very complex positions. Again, we are seeing a very, very sped up version of somebody's improvement. by having their repertoire of targets expand, recognize more and more different types of targets. And it is also flexible. They can add new rules, they can add new precepts, or they can remove them or find exceptions to it based on what they find appropriate. Previously, an 800 to 1000 rated player might say, unprotected queens are not really problematic because they tend to defend themselves.
Yeah.
But then we find out there's an exception to it when you're much higher rated, and that is this type of instance.
Right.
So it's the flexibility of it, it's the scalability of it, and the cohesiveness as you're using the same technique all the way up to master level that allows you to grow with the technique. In contrast, if you're doing, say, checks, captures, and threats, and then now you find some defensive moves, what are you going to do about it? How can you modify the technique such that you're growing with the technique?
Yeah.
You have to abandon the whole thing and then come up with a new rule for defensive moves.
Yeah. Just thinking about potential limitations, because in the course you also sometimes show very deep calculations, right? But that doesn't necessarily, like, maybe working memory wise, it becomes difficult for people to visualize certain depth of lines. Not that they are lacking technique, right? They know some patterns, but maybe this visualization itself is the basic limitation. That they could do it in a 3-ply context, let's say, but not so much, 7-ply context, and so on. They also get better over time with visualizations, right? Or do you talk about visualization at all in the course?
I don't talk much about visualization in the calculation course because my focus is on techniques.
Right.
However, I can give some advice on how to really improve your visualization.
Yes, please.
So there's a concept that I coined. I'm not sure if somebody else already has. I call it visualization decay. So let's say after 4 ply of visualizing, I could ask somebody how clearly can they see it? How clearly can they see the resulting position? And they might say something like, 70, 60% clarity. And what this necessarily means is that with each ply that they're looking into, there's a slight decay. So when the position is right in front of you, you can say that your clarity is 100%. On the next move, it's 90. On the next move, it's 80 and 70 and so on. And this also means that if you can visualize one move ahead perfectly with 0 decay completely, you can play a full game of blindfold chess, no problem. Because there's no decay. If I can see move 2 just as clearly as I can see move 1, I should be able to extend this to move 3. And then I should be able to extend it again to move 4. Which means that the quality of your visualization is much more important than the depth. Because if you can visualize short sequences with absolute clarity, you're not going to have a problem playing a full game of blindfold chess. So one of the exercises I recommend doing is almost a meditative exercise where you find a decently complex position, and you can take it from a grandmaster game. Find a 4-move section that has some captures. And then from there, you're just trying to spend 30 minutes or so visualizing each move very, very slowly. Maybe take 3 moves to internalize the full change of the position. I am going to...
One more position is coming. Your position about all concepts. Yes, it's white to play in this case.
Right, it's white to play. And now it's time for a bit of guided visualization.
Yeah, let's do it.
I've done a voice recording on this position that is about 20 or 30 minutes long, and it's just looking at a few move sequence.
Wow, okay.
I'm going to speed it up a little bit for you. We might do it in 3 to 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, so the first move I want you to visualize is bishop takes e6. No arrows or anything. Just visualize the bishop on c4, getting to e6.
Okay.
I want you to notice how much lonelier the f6 knight is. It previously had his brother right beside him.
Yeah.
But now it's just the f6 knight. Notice how much threat the bishop on e6 is under. It's got the d7 and f7 pawns attacking it. And I'll usually give the student some time to process it. And then after that, I'll move on to the next prompt. Notice the 4x4 grid whose corners are a3 and d6. That whole a3, a6, d6, d3 section. Notice how empty it is, with the
Yes.
exception of just that one c5 bishop.
Yes.
See, there's a lot of depth and to a single move of visualization already. So we can move on from there. Just say 5 minutes of doing this. And then I want you to visualize the next move. After bishop takes e6, black played bishop takes e3.
Yeah.
It's a good time to appreciate the full emptiness of that 4x4 grid I was talking about.
Right.
Between
Now it's
a3 to
empty.
d6. It's completely empty. You might find it a little bit cute that there are 4 pieces stacked on the e file. Black e3
Yes.
bishop,
Yes.
pawn, knight, and bishop. Once again, let's not forget previous details, such as the loneliness of this f6 knight and the d7 and f7 pawn attacking e6 here.
Yeah.
And with that, we can move on to the next move. Bishop takes f7. So we've got bishop takes e6, bishop takes e3, and now bishop takes f7 check.
Yes.
Notice how close the bishop is to black's king. It's attacked by the rook, it's attacked by the king. And the whole kingside pawn army has been reduced by 33%. There were previously 3 pawns there, now it's just g7 and h7.
Right.
Also, notice how empty that whole line from b3 to e6 is. In fact, if you visualize the empty space as a body of water, you can say that once the bishop has left e6, the water from a3 to d6 kind of flows down e6, e7, e8.
Wow. It's very poetic. Nice.
You can look at the bishop's possibilities on e8, g6, h5. They don't look very good. Again, the bishop completely surrounded by enemies. And let's proceed another step. Rook takes f7. Now,
Yes.
once again, if you think about the body of water, it just extended now not only from e6 to e8, but it includes f8 as well. We noticed that previously there were 3 soldiers in front of the enemy king, pawn, 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 but now it's rook, pawn, pawn.
Right.
Again, not forgetting the bishop is still on e3, has been under threat this whole time. It's had that full tension. And you can notice that's an incredible standoff in 2 different parts of the board. One between the f2 pawn and e3 bishop, and the other on the f7 square.
Right.
And now we move on to knight takes f7. We can see that the queen on d8 is feeling very uncomfortable. She's attacked right now. And also the entire 5th rank has cleared up. And you can continue to make observations like this. I'm going to speed it up a bit here. So king takes f7. Water is flowing to h8. The e file has cleared up quite nicely. And finally, f takes e3. And again, we can see, what do you call those things? You know, the people in the choir, they've got this thing that, ding, and then they know what pitch it is. What do you call that? A tuning fork? Oh,
Yeah. Yeah. Probably. I'm not an expert.
right.
But you have to,
Okay.
yeah.
That's kind of a tuning fork that you can see that extends from,
Ah.
say, d4 to d2 to f2 to f4, and then e1 is the little handle.
Right.
And once you have, again, this probably would be more helpful if it lasted 30 minutes. But now let's see the whole thing play out. First,
Yes.
actually, what I'd like to do is ask you to judge your visual acuity. How clearly do you think you can see this position?
Yeah. That's actually a very beautiful way that you ask me now. Um, I mean, I'm probably not a very visual, like, I'm mostly like a verbal thinker. I made an episode with Aidan Reiner. I think
Hmm.
I'm definitely much more on the verbal side of things than visualization. When I close my eyes, I cannot see that vivid apple image in my mind's eye, so to speak. So probably not like 100% clear, 100% clearly, crystal clear right now.
Hmm.
But I can, for example, tell you the material count. Maybe I can even do it like on the go right now. Maybe that's a good question, right? Like, what's the material
Right.
count at
Okay. Well,
that
that's
point?
yeah, that's another concept that's easy to mix up.
Hmm.
How well do you know the features of the position versus how well can you visualize the position? You know what? Let's
Yeah.
forget this position for a moment. Imagine an empty chessboard. I put a white king on c2 and the black king on f7.
Mm-hmm.
You know everything that's happening on this chessboard. But in all likelihood, if I ask you to look at the space between the c2 and f7 king, it's probably just a blur of squares. But if I ask you any specific information about it, you can answer it. So there's a difference between knowing the position and actually visualizing it.
Right.
When you know the position, like that c2 and f7 king, you're able to give its features, but you're not actually visualizing it. You're not seeing the detail of each square. It's all just a blur, most likely.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it's mostly on that side to me, the blurry side of things, than vivid, crystal
Right.
clear visualizations. Yeah. You know, there are even masters that's full of aphantasia, you know, like Koltanovsky, for example. He cannot
Yeah,
form
or
any mental image when he closes his
David
eyes.
Proust, I heard, was like that too. It's like that.
Who is like that?
David Proust.
Oh, yeah, David Proust. Yes, that's what he said. He doesn't see anything when he closes his eyes.
Yeah,
But he's
that's
an international
insane. Like
master.
he
Yeah,
just knows like, yeah,
yeah,
my e pawn has moved, and so now the bishop can go to e2, d3, c4, b5, a6. But
right,
I'm not
right.
seeing it. I have no idea how that works in his mind. But
Yeah, yeah. So it's a big continuum apparently, you know? Like there are many players also on that side of things, closer to that side than the verbal side. I'm definitely more on that side of things, verbal side of things. I'm not sure how much. So
right.
it takes real effort right now for me. You know, when you ask me, can you visualize the resulting position? I'm really like struggling right now actually to see it crystal clearly. Um,
The reason I
yeah.
emphasize the importance of visualization in whatever form it comes to people, as opposed to simply knowing some features like the material count and what's attacking what,
Mhm.
is that when you can visualize things, it helps with your passive memory. I believe that's what it's called, passive and active memory. So
Mm.
if I were to ask you, when is your dental appointment? And you said 2 p.m., that would be your active memory at play. I think so. I mean, I could be wrong on this, but the concept stands. Whereas if I were to ask you, hey John, are you free for lunch at 2 p.m.? And then you forget that you had a dental appointment. And so you say, yeah, I'm free for lunch, forgetting the dental appointment. That is more of your passive memory at play. When you're not given the trigger necessary to recall what's everything that's there.
Aha, maybe
So
like
if I
cued
ask you
or
to,
yeah, I think there's a name for that by the way as well. Yeah, like yeah, cued or non-cued recall or something. But I have to check that. Yep,
or it could be passive and active recall, maybe.
it could be, could be. Yeah.
Right. But anyway, so this I want your recall of a chess position to be so passive that you're able to spot blunders super easily. Because it's very easy
Mm.
for people to if I were to ask you, where is black's bishop? And you could say a7. But then because you're not thinking about the bishop, you may accidentally play rook to g1, forgetting that it's hanging.
Right.
And this is the importance of visualization and not just being able to say where every piece is.
Mm. Yeah. Point taken. Um, so in that sense, do you then recommend people like do you go through such exercises together to improve their visualization or like their
Yes, I mean
need to
for
work on that?
students who can visualize, I would go through an exercise like this. We were very slowly going through each move. And if you want, I mean, if you want to relieve this tension, you can finally play out those couple of moves.
Yes.
And the question I would have for, you can play out the whole thing, yeah, knight f7, king. How surprised are you by this final position?
Yeah.
Because some
Yeah.
people is like, I knew all the details, but I didn't expect it to look exactly like that.
Right. 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 Right.
And this is
Right.
also a point that people are very poor at judging their own visual acuity. It ties back to a story when I was 8 years old. I didn't wear glasses at the time, and I thought my eyesight was perfect. I can read things that are near, I can't read things that are far, but I think everybody is like that. And if you ask me, 8-year-old Azel, how clearly do you think you can see on a scale of 0% to 100%? I would think like 95%.
Yeah.
But then I got my glasses, I put it on, and oh, okay, now this is 95%. And before that, it was 70, 80%.
Right.
So the point here is that I believe most people are not good at judging how well they're visualizing something. And you can always be putting in more effort. And the reason it's important to put in more effort into visualization is because of the concept of visualization decay. If you can see a 4-move sequence very, very well, you can play a blindfold chess game.
Right. So
And visualization helps with your passive recall. So you can, it's a lot easier to see that an a7 bishop is attacking g1 if you're able to see the whole thing at once. Whereas if you're to individually recall where each piece is, by the time you get around to that corner on the king side, you might have forgotten about the bishop.
yeah, yeah. I made one episode with Benjamin Ballas. He's a vision scientist. He's a professor from North Dakota University, and he wrote many nice blog posts on Lichess, on blunders, visual acuity, visual crowding, and how our visual system limitations are causing blunders. And like one key findings was is that experts are better for with the overall board vision. Yeah, experts don't usually miss out on such bishops, partly also because of their expertise and chunks. You know, through our years of experience, they saw similar patterns before. Fianchetto bishops, for example. Yeah, like beginners definitely miss the fianchetto bishops affecting the other side of the board, as you mentioned. Yeah, like the bishop on a7 can be a bishop on g7. That's a more common pattern, by the way. Yeah, the bishop on g7 is a more common pattern than the bishop on a7. But experts, through years of experience, also internalize this as a common pattern in those, bishop a7 situations. Then there's a less chance, even though they are looking at the center of the board, for example, in that study, for example, eye tracking studies, they don't really miss out on the bishops on a7, despite not even like looking at it at all times. They spot such moves. It's like peripheral vision improves. Yeah, they are seeing the periphery of the board much more clearly than amateurs. There's like a skill range across the
Yeah,
years.
and a greater capacity to hold more information in your mind at once. So
Yes.
you're considering the bishop while looking at everything else
Yes.
instead of being super zoomed in on wherever on the
100%.
board you're looking at.
Exactly. We're looking at the center, maybe the king side, but the bishop is definitely playing some role in those
Yeah.
calculations. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's a huge area. Cool. So this was the visualization training, visualization decay that you mentioned. This was a great exercise, by the way. As I mentioned, I couldn't see this very position crystal clearly in my mind's eye. Like when we were talking, like to be 100% honest, like because once we come to this position, yeah, we can talk about evaluations, double pawns, extra exchange for white. All these evaluations we can discuss maybe much more easily in this position than before. But the problem is without proper evaluation, then calculation, is sort of
Yeah.
useless. So you need to at least stop and have some evaluations on the resulting positions of such forced sequences, because everything is forced in this case. So it's sort of White's responsibility, right, before they capture on e6 to evaluate the resulting position. In this case, there was 9-ply deep calculation, if I'm not wrong, yeah, maybe 7-ply, sorry. After 7-ply
Seven,
deep
yeah.
calculations, yeah, you need to stop here because there's no other forcing moves left. This knight is pinned, cannot take on e4. So it's a good time probably to stop and evaluate, yeah, from the first position. And
Yeah.
do you like to come here as white? Yes, probably, yeah. Once we come to this position, yes, extra exchange, and I'm hopeful about my conversion to this position than before. But yeah, did you by the way create this position from your head? Like you didn't have this position in the database, just a
I
random
remember
position
this
there.
from some opening. I think it's
Ah,
the
nice,
Italian Kotonowski Gambit.
cool. Yeah, good chess memory of a coach. Nice. Are there anything else that we not need to discuss, Azel? I mean, you have so many more positions.
No, I mean those are the main things.
Cool.
If you have other questions for me, but to summarize on the
Yes.
technique, you want something that you want to be critical of your techniques, especially calculation techniques. Specifically, things like how do you deal with false signals on the technique? And if you make a mistake with the technique, how are you going to improve with the technique? Instead of just adding more and more
Yeah.
reliance on your discretion. And then the other thing is, as you improve, you can grow your repertoire of known targets. And the more effort you put into learning different targets and different patterns, the more positions you can solve at once, the faster you're learning. Instead of learning
Yeah.
one position to solve 10,000, you can solve 100,000.
Yeah.
And patterns need not be geometrical, they can be conceptual as well, as we have seen with the Queen discovered check thing.
And there are, of course, even other patterns, like positional patterns, right?
Hmm.
Is this a happy piece? Is it a bad piece?
Yep.
Is this piece feeling good on this square or not? Positional patterns, because most of my courses are on positional stuff on Chessable. Positional patterns, the art of burying a piece. For example, there's a
Yeah.
fianchetto knight. I play g4 and I bury that knight. It's a typical positional pattern, and chunk, right? Or pass pawns in the end games, for example. You can come up
Hmm.
with some conceptual analysis. Or the outside pass pawn. Yeah, to my mind, that's very conceptual. They are the strength of an outside pass pawn. And you
Yeah.
connect it to, oh, I want to decoy the opponent's king. Of course, the opponent king gets distracted, then I win the game on the other side. That's a very transferable piece of conceptual knowledge, you see. Very, very relevant as well, like pawn end games. Okay, so then what's your, because but then the question becomes, given in importance of all these patterns, do you then recommend people to follow a certain regimen, for example spaced repetition, or there are any books that recommend to build those patterns and chunks and internalize them in their memories so they get much more faster, let's say, to recognize them, to learn those
Yeah.
important chunks?
The first thing I would say is learn how to use and annotate some basic PGN. So understand how it all works. And then once you got that down, every time you learn a new cool pattern and you want to make some extra notes to it, maybe it's the concept, not just the geometry, save it, create a fresh chessable course where you just keep dumping these positions. And then from there, you can do spaced repetition on them. And you can also reread your own notes on the position.
Yeah.
And in this way, you're getting a better and better feel for each pattern, which allows you to solve a wider and wider sphere of puzzles based on that single pattern.
I talked to Dan Bock about this, by the way. He improved his chess 400 points after his 40s. He used so many flashcards on Anki from his own games. He fails, he makes a mistake. If it's a transferable, important pattern that he slipped, he turns them into a flashcard. And with notes, of course, yeah? What the move
Yeah.
he chose in the game, and what's the correct move, and why. And then he does a space rep on his own mistakes. That makes it more personal in some sense.
Yeah.
And yeah, so positional patterns, tactical patterns, ideas that could be definitely drilled by space repetition. I mean, definitely, that's one main function of space repetition. Yes, and also you mentioned this end game stage. I guess that's also what you meant, yeah, in this episode, basically, the importance of end games and end game chunks, and so on. I guess that's what you also preach in the course,
Yeah,
if I'm
I
not
think
wrong.
end games are the one of the lowest hanging fruits in chess, especially at the tournament level, because all chess positions can potentially lead to the end game. And so if you know how to evaluate those, it's a huge stepping stone. You can just see this path is drawn, this path is winning, that path is losing very, very easily
Yeah,
because you know the end game. Just by knowing the position, you can see the next 50 moves to checkmate.
it's like
And
reverse
yeah,
engineering. Yeah, yes.
yes. And before I conclude this episode, I want to leave you with a riddle.
Yes, please.
All right, so imagine we have this magical island. This island has an unlimited amount of grass. You might have heard this before. It's
No.
got 7 lions and 1 sheep. Now, the sheep can't really do anything besides eat grass. The lions are the one with options. They can either eat the sheep or they can eat grass. Now, but here's the catch. The moment a lion eats a sheep, the lion will itself become a sheep and can be eaten by other lions.
Wow. Okay.
The lions are all perfectly logical, and they prefer eating sheep over grass. However, if it means that they themselves will get eaten in the future, then they're not willing to do it. So they will only eat the sheep if they know for sure they will be safe, based on the rationality of the other lions. The question is, does the sheep get eaten?
That's a good question. So you said there are 7 lions and 1 sheep, right?
Yes.
In that island. And is there like a time limit? Like if they don't, I mean, they are totally fine with eating the grass, right? It's like a
Yeah,
time continuum.
they're totally fine with it. They're totally fine eating grass. But if they can eat a sheep safely, they would want to eat the sheep.
Uh-huh. But the moment they eat the sheep, let's say I'm the first lion, right? I
Yeah.
really would like to eat the sheep. I would love to have it. But I'm thinking if I eat that sheep, then I will turn into a sheep. Then I will turn into a sheep, and there are 6 lions around. There are so many lions around. Then one of them might like to eat me as well, which is not desirable. Which is not desirable from my side.
Right. So you would think from this logic, you shouldn't eat the sheep.
Yes.
However, the other lions will be thinking the same thing. So why not just eat the sheep and bank that the other lions will be at this impasse?
I see. So from that rational point of view, if nobody wants to eat the sheep, then it doesn't hurt to eat the first sheep because the other guys will think the same anyways, right? So no one will touch the sheep from a rational point of view. So me eating a sheep doesn't change. I will just replace that sheep with myself basically, and nobody will touch it.
Right, but then what if somebody else comes to that same conclusion?
Yeah, yeah.
He got away with it. Maybe I can get away with it too, and then you get eaten.
Ah, okay. Yeah, yeah. So is there like a game theory like solution to this? Like is it like already proved or what? Like there's
Well,
a
it
perfect
ties back.
strategy.
It ties back to a chess concept, and that is
Yeah.
you want to think from the end game.
Ah, you start from the end and switch back
Yes.
to the. Aha,
Yes.
that's how you solve it. So imagine that you're the final lion or what? Just think
Yeah.
out
Say
loud.
if it's one lion and one sheep.
Yeah. If it's 1 lion and 1 sheep left, then of course I would love to have that sheep because there are no other lions left, right?
Exactly.
So as a final lion, I would love to eat that sheep. But then you put 2 lions, right? So if
Yeah.
I'm the last lion left, of course I should eat that sheep. If there are 2 lions left, that's the question.
Yeah.
If there are 2 lions left, then if one lion eats the sheep, then it turns into a sheep, which means the other guy wins. The other lion
Exactly.
wins.
So they'll both be like, you first, you first.
Yeah, they
You'll
will
never
say,
get-
you first, you first. I won't eat the sheep. You go first, please. That's
Yeah.
the best strategy with 2 lions.
Right. So the sheep is safe with 2 lions.
The sheep is definitely safe with 2 lions. Yes.
What if there are 3 lions?
If you eat that sheep, then you turn into a sheep, and the game is sort of finished there. Then no one will touch the sheep.
Exactly.
Which means I should eat the sheep.
Right. So 1 lion, the sheep is gone. 2 lions, the sheep is safe. 3 lions,
Yeah,
the sheep is
to be honest,
gone.
the sheep is gone again. Oh my god, we are finding a solution to this with odd numbers. You
Exactly.
should eat it. Yeah.
And
With
so
odd
if the
numbers,
sheep
you
is,
should
yeah, exactly. So if the sheep is in trouble with 3 lions, then with 4 lions, the sheep is safe again.
Safe, yes. With 5 lions, it's again. You should eat it.
Exactly. And then 6 and then 7, which is odd. So you know the sheep will be eaten.
Yes, 7 is the odd number. I see. So it's a beautiful like starting from the end state and then
Exactly.
building it up to the first position. Yeah.
Yes, this is a riddle I often ask my students. The first is that it shows about the importance of thinking from the end game. If you already know that whether the end game is winning or losing, that helps inform the prior choices. And the second is that it kind of teaches opposition. Where if there's an
Yeah.
odd number between, then it's opposition, and if it's even, it's not.
Yeah, interesting. That also, yeah. The
that
same
kind of
riddle
back and
also
forth,
teaches that.
yes.
Yeah. Nice. I like how you came up with this riddle to teach 2 concepts at a time.
Yeah. I found it on some random website. So
Okay, it wasn't you who came up with it. It's
Yeah,
actually
no,
like
it
a
wasn't.
well-known riddle. Yeah, beautiful. I like that. Yeah, it's full of lions, guys, lions and sheeps in the end game. Yeah, don't get don't get eaten. You know your end games, as Capablanca said as well. You know that there's some truth to this. Like we should first and foremost learn the end game because only through the end game, middle game decisions can be understood, right? So that was the main point of his idea, which makes definitely sense. Not only about the end games, but also some positional desirable mini plans. Let's say I want to establish a beautiful knight on d5 versus a bad bishop. That's my dream state. Then I modify
Yes.
the world. I go for the right exchange to get what I want, my
Hmm.
desired state, which I know the evaluation of, just like an endgame, right? Those are great tools. Or outside pass pawn. I know that outside pass pawn is winning, so I will exchange the right pieces in the middle game to leave myself in an outside pass pawn, and so on. Yeah, so that's a huge part. It makes it much more efficient knowing those dream states in chess too, instead of again check, capture, threat, brute force calculation process. Yeah.
Mm.
Okay, so that also connects nicely to the chess, mostly being a game of pattern recognition, just like in other expertise, right? Patterns and chunks stored in our long-term memories is the greatest predictor of success. And chess being such a vast and infinite game, it's not an exception, of course. I mean, that's also conclusion of many studies so far. No, great, Azel. I guess we didn't leave any point like untouched. And obviously, I'm just starting this podcast episodes. By the way, in the future, I would love to invite you again to this show that we can discuss so many other fascinating topics about around chess, riddles. I can prepare my own riddles against you, and I can test you with some riddles in the end, and
Go for it,
we
yeah.
can mix it up. We can mix it up. No, thank you so much for all this preparation. I mean, all the positions you prepared for us, for my audience as well. You're really appreciated, and I'm sure my guys will love you as well as a coach, as a author. I'm sure they know your courses on Chessable. If not, guys, I will post a link on this video description. Azel Chua's courses on Chessable, extremely successful and a very thoughtful author, candidate master, just like I am, a great educator. Thank you so much, Azel, and we'll catch you hopefully very soon in this episode. Thank you
Thank you
again.
so much, John.